The chamber was carved into the belly of an asteroid, and it held 400 species like a throat holds a scream. Seats rose in concentric rings toward a ceiling lost in shadow, every row packed with delegates whose bodies ranged from insectoid to crystalline to shapes that had no Earth equivalent. The air tasted recycled and faintly sweet, filtered through systems designed to keep 400 biologies from poisoning each other. Quan Mireille stood alone on the respondent's platform. It was a disk of polished stone, slightly lower than the rest of the chamber floor. That was deliberate. Everything in the Concord Tribunal was deliberate. The platform forced the accused to look up at their judges. It made the body small. It made the voice carry badly. Mireille had studied the acoustics before arriving, and positioned herself 3 inches left of center, where the sound bounced cleanest off the curved walls behind her. She wore a dark suit, no medals, no insignia. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she held them still the way a person holds a door shut against wind. Olo Varric spoke first. The High Arbiter sat in a suspended cradle at the chamber's apex, 7 limbs folded into a posture that Mireille's cultural briefing described as judicial stillness. His voice came through translation filters and arrived in her earpiece as a deep, genderless hum. Earth stands accused. The words dropped into the chamber, and the silence that followed had weight. Varric continued. He read the charges with the patience of someone who had been reading charges for longer than most civilizations had existed. 17 violations of the Edicts of Proportional Engagement. Deployment of weapons not registered in the Concord Arms Index. Failure to transmit fleet composition prior to engagement. Targeting of infrastructure within civilian proximity thresholds. Refusal to accept surrender terms as defined under edict law. Each charge landed in the chamber like a stone into still water. The delegates murmured after each one. Some species clicked. Some hummed. One delegation in the upper ring emitted a low vibration that Mireille felt in her molars. She listened to all 17 charges without moving. When Varric finished, the chamber waited. This was the part of the ritual where the accused species spoke, where they apologized or bargained or promised reform. Mireille had watched recordings of 11 previous tribunals. Every single respondent had folded at this stage. Some wept. One species had offered territorial concessions before the charges were even fully read. Mireille unclenched her hands. Earth does not recognize the authority of the Edicts of Proportional Engagement, she said. Her voice carried clean and flat across the stone. Earth is not a signatory to the edicts. Earth has never been a signatory. The edicts are a contractual framework between consenting parties, and Earth did not consent. The chamber cracked open like an egg. 400 species reacted at once. The sound was enormous and layered, a wall of clicks and roars and frequencies that pushed past hearing into something felt in the chest. Delegates stood, limbs waved, translation systems overloaded, and spat fragments of outrage in 19 languages into Mireille's earpiece, before she pulled it out and let the noise wash over her raw. Varric's cradle descended 3 feet, which the cultural briefing said meant he was furious. His voice cut through the chaos with a frequency that silenced the chamber, the way a blade silences skin. Order. Silence. Immediate. 400 species remembered what Varric was. Ambassador Quan. Varric's limbs rearranged into a different configuration. Mireille's briefing had no translation for this one. You stand in a chamber of law. Every spacefaring species in the known galaxy operates under the edicts. They are not optional. They are the foundation of civilized warfare. How does Earth presume to wage war outside this framework? Mireille let the question sit for exactly 2 seconds. Timing learned from 20 years of diplomacy, from rooms smaller than this one, but no less dangerous. I will defer that answer to my military commander, she said. He can explain Earth's position more precisely than I can. She pressed a signal on the comm unit at her wrist. A hololink opened beside the respondent's platform, and the image that materialized was a man sitting at a wooden desk. Behind him, a window showed rain falling on a city Mireille knew was Seoul, though the delegates would not know that. The man held a cup of tea. He was in his early 50s, with short gray-streaked hair, and a face that looked like it had been designed specifically for patience. Admiral Yoon Tae-ho looked up at 400 species as though they had interrupted his afternoon. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a cold one either. It was the smile of a man who had read every document in the room before anyone else arrived, and had been waiting, politely, for the conversation to catch up. "Hi, Arbiter Varric," Tae-ho said. His voice was quiet, and the chamber's acoustics carried it perfectly, because Mireille had sent him the acoustic map 2 days ago. The edicts of proportional engagement are not universal law. They are a contract. A contract requires signatures. Earth's signature does not appear on that contract. It never has. He paused, took a sip of tea. The gesture was calm in a way that made the 400 species lean forward. Because calmness in this chamber was so unusual, it registered as threat. "But Earth is not lawless," Tae-ho continued. "We did not reject your framework to operate without one. We rejected it because we read it." Another sip. "We read all of it, including the parts that most signatories appear not to have read, and we found it insufficient." He set the cup down. "So we wrote our own. It is called the Seoul Conventions. I am transmitting it to every delegation in this chamber now." The chamber's data systems chimed 400 times in rapid succession as the document arrived on every delegate's terminal. 900 pages, translated into every Concord language, formatted for every species reading interface. Tae-ho smiled again. "I encourage you to read all of it, including the parts that explain exactly which provisions of the edicts legalize the subjugation of species who never agreed to be governed by them." The chamber did not erupt this time. The silence was worse. It was the silence of 400 species realizing at the same moment that the document on their screens was not a defense. It was an accusation. Olo Varric opened the first page of the Seoul Conventions. His 7 limbs went still, in a configuration that needed no cultural briefing to translate. Baek Soyun had not slept in 31 hours, and the coffee in her hand had gone cold twice. She stood in front of a wall-sized display in the command briefing room aboard the carrier Docto, pointing at a block of alien legal text with a stylus that she kept clicking open and shut like a nervous heartbeat. "Clause 7, subsection 14, she said. "This is the one that kills them." Admiral Yoon Tae-ho sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded. Ha Jinu sat to his left, arms crossed, looking at the display like it owed him money. Kwan Mireille attended by hololink from the Concord station, her image flickering at the edges. Soyun tapped the clause. The text expanded. The edicts define a recognized combatant species as one that has formally ratified the framework. Any species that has not ratified is classified as, and I am translating this directly, a pre-civilized entity. That classification carries specific legal consequences. She swiped to the next page. A pre-civilized entity has no standing to negotiate surrender terms. It has no right to territorial sovereignty under edict law. And any signatory species can petition for stewardship mandate over a pre-civilized entity's homeworld, which means they can legally take your planet, your resources, and your population, and call it guardianship. Jinu uncrossed his arms. "How many species are under stewardship right now?" 63. The number sat in the room like a stain. Tae-ho spoke without looking up from his hands. "How many of those 63 had spaceflight capability when they were classified?" "At least 12, Soyun said. "Possibly more. The records are incomplete. Because stewardship mandates allow the governing species to control information access, which means the ones under stewardship can't even verify their own history. Mirei's hollow image leaned forward. And none of this is hidden. It's in the document. It's in the document, Soyun confirmed. Page 412, buried in jurisdictional subclauses that reference 7 other sections. You'd need a legal team and about 3 weeks to trace the full chain of logic, which is exactly the point. 9 months earlier, Soyun had not known any of this. 9 months earlier, she had been sitting in a repurposed lecture hall at Seoul National University, surrounded by 40 people who smelled like stress and printer ink, reading the edicts for the first time. The Concorde had transmitted the document as a courtesy when Earth's first deep space colony made contact with a Reth trading outpost. The transmission came with a polite suggestion that Earth formalize its legal standing by signing. Taeho had handed her the document personally. He had said one sentence, "Read it like a lawyer, not a diplomat." She read it like a lawyer. It took her 6 days to find the first trap, a clause that defined weapons of engagement so narrowly that half of Earth's existing arsenal fell outside the definition, meaning any use of those weapons would constitute a violation punishable by sanctions up to and including territorial seizure. Earth's ships, Earth's guns, Earth's way of fighting, all of it was illegal by default, under a law Earth had never agreed to. She found the second trap on day 8. A provision requiring all combatant species to transmit their full fleet composition, weapons capability, and strategic doctrine to the Concorde's central registry before any engagement. The registry was maintained by the 5 founding species. The same 5 species who had written the edicts. The same 5 species who would therefore know the exact military capability of every potential enemy before any war began. By day 12, Soyun had stopped eating regular meals and started keeping a list on a whiteboard that she titled, "Ways This Document Legalizes Conquest." The list had 14 entries. Her team checked each one. None of them were wrong. On day 14, Taeho visited the lecture hall. He looked at the whiteboard. He looked at Soyun, who had coffee stains on her shirt and a pen behind each ear, and the expression of someone who had stared into a machine and understood its gears. "Can you write something better?" he asked. "I can write something honest," she said. "Better is harder." "Start with honest." She started. The Seoul Conventions took 9 days to draft. Not because the principles were complex. They were simple. Protection of non-combatant populations regardless of legal classification. Prohibition of forced stewardship. Right to refuse foreign legal jurisdiction. Mandatory third-party verification of surrender terms. Proportional response requirements that applied equally to all parties, regardless of size or technology level. The principles were simple, making them airtight under interstellar legal scrutiny, while simultaneously exposing the edict's failures without directly naming them. That was the part that cost Soyun her sleep, her appetite, and most of her patience. She argued with Taeho twice, once about the language and the escalation doctrine. She wanted it aggressive, he wanted it clinical. He won. Once about whether to include a direct comparison table between the Seoul Conventions and the edicts. She wanted it included. He said no. "We don't tell them what to see," he said. "We give them the document and let them read. If we have to explain why our version is better, then we wrote it badly." She deleted the comparison table. She hated that he was right. Now, 9 months later, the document sat on 400 delegate screens, and Soyun was watching its effects ripple outward in real time. 12 species have made back-channel requests for full copies through unofficial diplomatic contacts, Mirei reported from the Concorde station. 3 of them are currently under stewardship mandates. The hegemony of Reth has announced enforcement action, Jinu said. He pulled the report up on his own display. They're calling it a compliance operation. 200 warships, standard edict formation. Soyun watched Taeho's face. The admiral looked at the fleet numbers, the way a chess player looks at an opponent's opening move, not with fear, but with recognition. Standard formation, Tejo repeated. Standard, Jinnu confirmed. Broadcasting their fleet composition in advance. Already transmitted. Every ship, every weapon system, every engagement corridor, per edict protocol. Tejo set down his tea. He did not smile. The absence of the smile was louder than any words he could have spoken, and everyone in the room felt the temperature change. Not in the air, but in the man. A shift from the professor who argued about footnotes to something older and quieter, and far less interested in being polite. They are coming to fight a species that plays by their rules, Tejo said. They have told us exactly how they will fight. They have told us exactly what they will bring. He looked at Jinnu. Show them what a species looks like when it writes its own. Jinnu stood on the bridge of the carrier Docto and watched 200 Reth warships arrange themselves into a perfect grid across the dark. They were beautiful. He hated himself a little for thinking it, but they were. Each ship held its position with a precision that spoke of centuries of drilled obedience. Hulls glowing faintly with running lights that served no tactical purpose, but which the edicts required as identifiers of combatant status. The Reth fleet broadcast its presence like a parade. Weapon signatures open, shield frequencies visible, engagement corridors mapped and transmitted on every channel. They were telling him exactly how they planned to kill him. Jinnu's fleet was dark. 87 ships, no running lights, no broadcast signals, no transmitted fleet data. Every vessel running silent across a volume of space that the Reth sensors could see but could not read, because Earth's ships were not speaking the language that Reth sensors were trained to hear. Commander Satal is hailing us, his comms officer said. He is requesting fleet composition data per edict protocol. We're not under edict protocol, Jinnu said. Send nothing. He's hailing again. He says failure to transmit constitutes a non-combatant posture under edict law. If we don't transmit, he cannot legally fire on us. Jinnu looked at the grid of Reth ships. 200 vessels, weapons hot, shields up, locked into engagement corridors that they had drawn in advance and transmitted to both sides like a shared map. Under the edicts, battle was structured. You told your enemy where you would be, they told you where they would be. You met in the agreed-upon corridors and fought within agreed-upon parameters, and whoever lost surrendered under agreed-upon terms. It was war with the chaos removed, war made into ceremony, war made safe for the people who wrote the rules. Jinnu had grown up reading about Incheon and Midway and the Tet Offensive and 1,000 other moments where the side that was supposed to lose refused to fight on the terms offered to them. He had studied military history the way some people study religion, not for comfort, but for truth. And the truth was this: the side that controls the rules controls the war before it starts. The Reth controlled the rules. Jinnu was not going to play by them. Helm, he said. Execute formation, Nulwan. Nulwan was not in any Concord tactical database. It was not in any database at all, except Earth's, because it had been designed by a team of tactical theorists who had spent 2 years studying Edict-era fleet engagements and asking one question: what if you don't stand in the corridor? The 87 ships of Earth's fleet moved. They did not move into a grid. They did not form lines or walls or any of the geometric structures that Edict doctrine treated as the natural grammar of space combat. Instead, they flowed, spreading into a 3-dimensional web that wrapped around the Reth formation like water around a stone. Ships shifted in pairs and trios, covering each other's blind spots, trading positions in a rolling dance that had no fixed shape because it was not designed to hold a shape. It was designed to adapt. On the Reth flagship, Dren Satal watched his tactical display and felt something he had not felt in 40 years of command: confusion. His sensors showed 87 enemy ships, fewer than half his force. But they were not behaving like ships. They were behaving like a single organism, a thing with no center and no edges. And every time his targeting systems locked onto a vessel, it slid behind another one before the firing solution could complete. "They are not in formation," his tactical officer reported. The officer's voice had a quality that Satal recognized. He had heard it in young soldiers before their first engagement. Not fear exactly. The sound of something expected failing to arrive. "They are in formation," Satal corrected. "We simply do not recognize it." He gave the order to fire. The Wraith fleet opened up along their pre-mapped engagement corridors, pouring energy into the spaces where Edict Doctrine said the enemy should be. Earth ships were not in those spaces. The web of 87 vessels contracted and expanded like a breathing thing, letting the Wraith volleys pass through gaps that opened and closed in fractions of seconds. And then, in the spaces between the Wraith's firing cycles, Earth's ships struck. Not at the Wraith hulls, at their engines, at their weapon mounts, at the specific systems that allowed the ships to fight and move, targeted with a surgical focus that spoke of intimate knowledge of Wraith ship architecture, knowledge gained from the fleet composition data that Satal had broadcast in advance. He had told them where everything was. They used it. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, 168 Wraith warships drifted without power or weapons. 32 had retreated under their own engine capacity. Not one had been destroyed. Jinnu stood on the bridge and watched the drifting fleet, and felt his hands shaking. He put them in his pockets so no one would see. 11 minutes. He had been commanding combat operations for 11 minutes, and his body was burning through adrenaline it had been storing since the Wraith ships first appeared on sensors 6 hours ago. "Broadcast on all Wraith channels," he said. "Standard language. Seoul Convention's Article 12. His comms officer sent the transmission. Article 12 of the Seoul Conventions required a victorious party to offer immediate terms: cessation of hostilities, medical assistance for wounded personnel, and a mutual non-aggression framework with no territorial demands and no tribute. The edicts had no equivalent article. Under the edicts, victory meant occupation or payment. There was no provision for winning and then simply stopping. Satal's voice came through the comm channel 40 seconds later. Jinnu had expected anger. The voice was not angry. It was hollow, in the way that a voice gets when the ground beneath the speaker has shifted, and they have not yet found new footing. "Commander Ha, you disabled my fleet in 11 minutes. You used our own broadcast data to target our systems. This is..." A pause. "This is not how war is conducted." "It is how we conduct it," Jinnu said. "You could have destroyed us." "Yes. Why didn't you?" Jinnu thought about Taeho. He thought about a battle 3 years ago, a smaller one, a skirmish that nobody except the people in it would remember. He had been commanding a frigate on the border, outgunned and cornered, and the tactical math said his ship should be sacrificed to buy time for the fleet to reposition. Taeho had looked at the math. Taeho had disagreed with the math. Taeho had sent 4 ships to pull Jinnu out, at cost, at risk, because Taeho believed that a law of war meant nothing if the first thing it sacrificed was its own people. Jinnu had never asked Taeho about that decision. He did not need to. The decision was the answer. "Because our law says we don't have to," Jinnu said. "Commander, your wounded need medical support. We are sending aid ships now. They are unarmed. They will broadcast their positions and their contents openly. This is not required under any framework I know. It's required under ours." Silence on the channel. The kind of silence that happens when someone is being offered something they have no category for. "Article 12 of the Seoul Conventions," Jinnu said. "I can send you a copy." Satal's voice came back, and now there was something else in it. Not gratitude, not defeat. Something closer to the sound a locked door makes when it discovers the existence of hinges. "Send it." Jinnu nodded to his comms officer. The document transmitted. Outside the bridge windows, the first aid ships launched toward the drifting Wrath fleet, their running lights blazing white against the dark, because they had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. And the law that governed them had been written by people who believed that winning a war and being worthy of winning it were not the same thing. The news moved faster than light, because the Concorde's own communication relays carried it, and because no one thought to stop it before it was too late. Earth's fleet had engaged the hegemony of Wrath, 87 ships against 200. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Earth disabled the Wrath fleet without destroying a single vessel, then sent medical ships. The facts alone were a weapon, but the part that cracked the Concorde open was not the battle. It was the document. Because in the same transmission that reported the engagement, Earth included a full copy of the Seoul Conventions, with a footnote citing the specific articles under which the battle had been conducted, the specific proportionality clauses that prohibited unnecessary destruction, and the specific post-combat obligations that required aid to wounded enemies. Every species in the Concorde received that transmission, and every species could see, side by side, what Earth's law required versus what the edicts permitted. Kwan Mireille felt the shift before she saw the data. She was sitting in her quarters on the Concorde station, drinking water because her stomach could not handle anything else, when her secure terminal began receiving diplomatic pings. 1, 3, then 11 in the space of 4 minutes. Then 40. She opened them in order. The first was from a species called the Vienu, a small aquatic civilization that had been under Wrath stewardship for 300 years. Their message was 4 words long: "We request the document." The second was from the Oreni, a species Mireille had never heard of. They were under stewardship of one of the Concorde's founding civilizations. Their message was longer and written in a syntax that suggested their translation systems were outdated by at least a century. But the meaning was clear. They wanted the Seoul Conventions. They wanted to know if a species under stewardship mandate could legally adopt an independent combat code. They wanted to know if the door was real. Mireille forwarded every message to Taeho and Soyeon. Then she sat back and stared at the growing list, and let herself feel the weight of what was happening, not triumph, not satisfaction, but the heavy understanding that she had helped kick a stone off the top of a very tall hill, and now it was rolling, and it would not stop, and it would break things on the way down that she could not predict. 3 decks above her, in the upper chambers of the Concorde station, Olo Varek was feeling a different kind of weight. He sat in a sealed conference room with representatives of the 5 founding species. The room's atmosphere was adjusted for all 5 biologies, which meant it was comfortable for none of them. Comfort had not been part of his thinking for several days. "We must declare Earth a rogue state," said the representative of the Kefal, a tall insectoid species whose wings buzzed when they were agitated. The wings had not stopped buzzing since the meeting began. Their fleet engaged a Concorde member in direct violation of the edicts. Their so-called conventions are a fabrication designed to undermine 3,000 years of legal precedent. "They are not a fabrication," Varek said. The room went quiet. "I have read the Seoul Conventions," Varek continued, "in full. I have compared them to the edicts, clause by clause. The Earth document is not a rejection of law. It is a legal framework that addresses deficiencies in our own." "Deficiencies?" the Kethal representative repeated. The word came through the translator with an edge that did not need translation. "The stewardship provisions," Varek said. He spoke the words carefully, the way a surgeon places a blade. Clause 7, subsection 14. The classification of non-signatory species as pre-civilized entities. The legal mechanism by which 63 species have been placed under the governance of signatory powers without consent. "Those provisions exist for protection," said the representative of the Arath, a species of dense, slow-moving beings whose voices resonated at frequencies that made Varek's joints ache. Pre-civilized species cannot govern themselves in an interstellar context. The stewardship framework provides stability. The stewardship framework provides control, Varric said, and the Earth document names it as such, in precise legal language, with citations to our own text. He let the silence sit. If we declare Earth a rogue state and authorize a coalition strike, Varric said, we prove their argument. We demonstrate that the edicts exist to enforce compliance, not to ensure justice. Every species currently reading the Soul Conventions will watch what we do next and draw their own conclusions. The Cathal's wings buzzed louder, and if we do nothing, the framework collapses. Species will abandon the edicts. The stewardship mandates will be challenged. The entire structure of interstellar governance will fracture. It is already fracturing, Varric said. He was right. They all knew he was right. The question was not whether the structure was breaking. The question was what they were willing to do to hold it together, and whether what they were willing to do would make the breaking worse. The meeting ended without resolution. The founding species retreated to their separate quarters to consult with their home governments. Varric remained in the conference room, alone. He opened a private comm channel. He should not have been doing this. The High Arbiter was meant to be impartial, above the politics of individual species, bound to the edicts and to nothing else. But Varric was 3,000 years old, and in 3,000 years he had learned that impartiality was only useful when the system it served was worth defending. The HoloLink connected. Admiral Yoon Tae-ho appeared, seated at his wooden desk. The same desk. The same rain, visible through the window behind him. The same cup of tea, though this one was steaming. Varric studied the human's face. He had met thousands of species. He had presided over hundreds of tribunals. He knew how to read the geometry of an alien expression, even when the features were unfamiliar. Tae-ho's face was patient. Not smug, not defiant. Patient the way deep water is patient, because it has already decided where it is going, and is in no hurry to arrive. Admiral Yoon, Varric said, I have a question that is not a legal one. I'm listening. Your species could have simply refused to engage. You could have built your fleet, guarded your borders, and ignored the Concord entirely. You had no obligation to write an alternative framework. Why did you? Tae-ho picked up his tea, held it, did not drink. Because refusal is a wall, he said. It keeps things out, but it doesn't build anything. We didn't want to shut the Concord out. We wanted to show everyone that there is somewhere else to walk. Varric's limbs rearranged themselves into a posture he had not used in centuries. It was the posture of consideration, of genuine uncertainty, the physical expression of a mind encountering a thought it could not yet categorize. You understand, Varric said, that the founding species will not accept this. They will fight to preserve the edicts. Some will, and some of your allies will lose. Some of the species now reading your conventions will be punished for their interest. I know, and you accept this. Tae-ho set the tea down. High Arbiter, there is no version of change that does not cost something. We wrote the Soul Conventions knowing they would cause pain. We wrote them anyway, not because we are willing to let others suffer for our principles, but because the current system requires their suffering as its foundation. The question is not whether there will be a cost. The question is, who has been paying it all along? Varric closed the channel. He sat in the empty conference room for a long time. Then he opened his personal terminal and pulled up the Edicts of Proportional Engagement. He navigated to Clause 7, subsection 14. He read the stewardship provision again, word by word, as he had read it 1,000 times in his career. He had always read it as law. Now he read it as a confession. He closed the edicts. He opened the Soul Conventions, and he began, with 3,000 years of legal training and the slow, grinding weight of something that felt uncomfortably like shame, to read. 6 months later, the chamber looked different. The respondent's platform was gone. Mireille had made the request personally, and when the Concorde's Facilities Committee had refused, she had asked Jinnu to send a team of engineers from the Docto to remove it. The engineers arrived at 3 a.m. station time, cut the platform from its mounts with tools that could carve warship armor, and replaced it with a round table made of synthetic wood that Soyun had sourced from a supply depot in Busan. The table sat level with the floor. No seat was higher than any other. The Facilities Committee filed a formal complaint. Nobody read it. 47 species had ratified the Seoul Conventions, or modified versions of them. 19 more were in active negotiation. The Concorde still existed, but its membership had split like a tree struck down the center. Both halves still standing, but leaning away from each other, with the wound visible between them. Yoon Taeho entered the chamber through a side door, because the main entrance funneled visitors past a series of species banners, arranged in order of Concorde seniority, and he did not want to walk beneath symbols of a hierarchy he had spent the last year dismantling. He wore his uniform, no medals. He had been offered several. He had declined all of them, because he believed that decorating a man for writing a better law was like decorating a plumber for fixing a broken pipe. The work was the point. The work did not need jewelry. The chamber was filling. Delegates from dozens of species took seats around the table or in the lower rings. The upper rings, where the founding species traditionally sat in elevated positions, were half empty. 3 of the 5 founders and sent representatives. 2 had not. Their absence was a message, and the message was understood. Olo Varric sat at the table, not in his suspended cradle, not in the arbiter's position. He had resigned the title of High Arbiter 3 weeks after his conversation with Taeho, in a brief statement that cited irreconcilable conflict between the duties of the office and the requirements of conscience. The statement had caused a political earthquake, but Varric had delivered it with the same judicial stillness he had used to read charges for 3,000 years. And somehow that stillness made the words land harder. He sat now as a legal observer. He carried a data tablet containing a draft proposal he had spent 4 months writing, a framework that attempted to merge the strongest elements of the edicts with the principles of the Seoul Conventions. He did not know if anyone would read it. He had written it anyway, because 3,000 years of legal practice had taught him that the act of writing law was itself an act of faith, a belief that reason could be given shape, and that shape could hold against the pressure of power. Dren Satal sat 2 seats away from Ha Jinnu. They had not spoken before the session. They did not speak now. But when the session's translation system glitched during a procedural vote, and Satal's earpiece spat a burst of scrambled sound, Jinnu reached over without looking and adjusted the frequency on Satal's device. His fingers were quick and certain. Satal watched him do it and inclined his head once, a ref gesture that meant something between acknowledgement and the settling of an unspoken account. Jinnu nodded back. Neither of them needed to say what the gesture meant. 6 months ago, Jinnu had sent medical ships to Satal's crippled fleet. In the Reth tradition of warfare, accepting aid from a victor created a bond that was not debt and not alliance, but something that lived in the space between those things. A recognition that the person across from you had the power to destroy and chose not to, and that this choice was worth remembering. Baek Soyun sat near the back of the table, as far from the center as she could manage without actually leaving the room. She did not want to be here. She wanted to be in her office on the Docto, reviewing the 17 amendment proposals that had been submitted by newly ratifying species, each one containing modifications to her original text that ranged from brilliant to baffling. But Taeho had asked her to come. He had said it would matter. She had learned over the past year that when Taeho said something would matter, he was usually right, in ways she did not understand until later. She sat and listened as delegates spoke. They cited clauses she had written. Article 4, on the prohibition of forced stewardship. Article 12, on post-combat obligations. Article 23, on the right of any species to withdraw from a legal framework without penalty. They used her words the way builders use bricks, stacking them into arguments she had never imagined. And she felt something settle behind her ribs that was not pride exactly, but the sensation of a thing she had made leaving her hands and becoming real in the world. No longer hers, no longer controllable, alive. A delegate from the Venu, the small aquatic species that had sent the first forward message to Mire, cited Article 7 as grounds for a formal sovereignty claim against their wretched stewards. The delegate spoke through a water-filled translation chamber, and the words arrived in the room's speakers with a faint gurgling undertone that made them sound like they were rising from a deep place. Which, Soyun thought, they were. The session moved through procedural matters. Ratification confirmations. Amendment reviews. The establishment of a joint verification body to oversee compliance, not under Concord authority, but under a new independent framework with rotating oversight from member species. No permanent seat for anyone, no founding privilege. Taeho spoke last. He did not stand at a podium. He spoke from his seat at the table, and his voice was the same quiet voice he had used in the HoloLink with Varric. The same voice he used to order tea. The same voice he had used to tell Jinnu to show the ref what a species looks like when it writes its own laws. The voice did not change, because the man behind it did not change. The volume was not the point. The clarity was the point. I had a professor once, he said. A long time ago, before any of this, she taught a course on the philosophy of law, and on the first day she said something I have never forgotten. 400 species, or what remained of them, listening. She said that the first thing any empire does is write laws that make its power look like justice. And the first thing free people do is write laws that make justice possible, even without power. He paused. The pause was not dramatic. It was the pause of a man gathering the last of what he wanted to say, and holding it in his hands like something fragile. Earth was not offended by the edicts. We were educated by them. They showed us exactly what a combat law looks like when it is written by those who expect to win. So we wrote one for everyone else. Not because we are better. We are not better. We have been the empire. We have written the unjust law. We know the machinery from the inside. He looked around the table, at Varric, who had resigned everything to sit here, at Satal, who had accepted aid from the fleet that broke his, at So-yun, who had built the document in 9 sleepless days on coffee and fury, at Mire, who had stood alone on a lowered platform and refused to look up. We wrote it because we have been the everyone else long enough to know what is missing. The chamber held still. Then Mire called the first vote under the new framework. A ratification of the joint oversight body. A small thing. A procedural thing. The kind of thing that appeared in footnotes and was forgotten by everyone except the people it protected. It passed. Taeho walked out of the chamber through the same side door he had entered. The corridor was empty and quiet, and smelled like recycled air and synthetic stone. So-yun caught up to him halfway to the docking bay. She fell into step beside him the way she always did, half a pace behind, because his legs were longer, matching his rhythm without thinking about it. "Do you think it will hold?" she asked. "The new framework? The coalition? The table?" Taeho walked for a few more steps before answering. His footsteps echoed in the corridor, steady and unhurried. "No," he said. "They will break it eventually. Someone always does." He stopped walking. He looked back toward the chamber, toward the closed door and the 400 species behind it, and the round table that sat level with the floor. He smiled. Not the smile from the tribunal, the one that was a weapon. Not the smile from the briefing room, the one that was a mask. A different one, smaller. The kind that lives in the corners of the mouth and does not perform for anyone. That is why we made it easy to rewrite. They walked to the docking bay. Behind them, in the chamber, delegates were already arguing about amendment procedures and jurisdictional boundaries and the precise language of Article 9. The arguments would continue for years. They would be messy. They would be incomplete. They would produce a framework full of compromises and half-measures and provisions that someone, someday, would find insufficient. And when that day came, the document was designed to be opened again, to be read again, to be rewritten by whoever needed it most. That was the point. That had always been the point.